Welcome to the Common Man Football Show. My name is James Cobern, and today's episode, we're doing Brandin Cooks versus Michael Thomas.
There can be only one.
And this was actually a question submitted by non-uploader 777. He asked the question of, can you do a Brandin Cooks versus Michael Thomas, please? And yes, I can. We're going to be looking at Brandin Cooks versus Michael Thomas from an analytics standpoint, basically looking at their production, their athleticism coming out of college, and then of course what they actually did in the NFL, which is also based on similar data to the college data. So lots of stuff to unpack with these two guys, but the basic thing is Brandin Cooks, of course, was traded to the New England Patriots later this, or basically earlier this year. And there's been a lot of speculation in terms of Michael Thomas and Brandin Cooks in terms of kind of a heated, I wouldn't say heated argument, but just the sort of, I don't like you, you don't like me, jealousy, who knows, but there's been some kind of heated debate about who's better, Brandin Cooks, Michael Thomas. And the Saints are a unique situation because the Saints have always been sort of a wide receiver by committee sort of setup, where they don't necessarily have a wide receiver who just leads the team in receiving yards by exponential degree. Essentially, they don't really have like a Jerry Rice, nor do they need like a Jerry Rice or Odell Beckham Jr. or Antonio Brown. Like, they've never been a team who really needed to have a wide receiver to be elite. They just always were able to kind of cobble together a wide receiver core out of a bunch of different wide receivers because their offense is very much set with mismatches in mind, and everybody gets the ball in this type of offense. So you'll very rarely find a wide receiver in a Saints offense that's just going to be totally dominant and get like 1,500, 1,700 yards, in a season. Like, it just doesn't happen that often in that offense, and that kind of hurts the projection here, I guess, in terms of figuring out who's better, Michael Thomas or Brandin Cooks. But I figure, you know what, let's go through their data, let's go through all that stuff, and we'll ultimately, we'll come to a decision on whether or not it was right for the Saints to get rid of Brandin Cooks. And what Michael Thomas's future will probably be in the Saints offense in the future. And again, the main data we're going to be using is production data, which is specifically passing yardage, market share production. Passing yards, market share production is where you take an individual defensive statistic, in this case passing yardage, and you divide it by the team total yardage. And then we're also going to be looking at athleticism data, specifically explosive lower body strength, which takes the vertical and the broad jump, which are the drills at the combine, and measured against mass density. The 40-yard dash or speed score incorporates the 40-yard dash measured against mass density. Mass density, of course, is weight divided by height. And, of course, flexibility, which is the short shell and three cone, measured against mass density. And those are the main sort of metrics to get out of the way, so you have a clear idea about what I'm talking about, I guess, when I talk about these particular metrics. And again, with that out of the way, let's get to Brandin Cooks in terms of what he looked like in terms of his production and his athleticism. When it comes to Brandin Cooks in terms of his production, he had an 86.69 passing yards market share production score, which based on all my data puts him into 5-time All-Pro, 3-time All-Pro, and 3-time Pro Bowl sort of threshold for market share production. It doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be a multiple All-Pro player, as much as the chances of him becoming a multiple All-Pro player or even a Pro Bowl player are a lot higher considering how he produced in college. So his production was very good coming out of Oregon State. And when it comes to his athleticism, he did have some very unique athleticism traits in terms of the fact that he had a 54.15 explosive lower body strength score, a 95.04 speed score, and a 98.58 flexibility score. Overall, he is very much a speed flexibility type of athlete. He's not necessarily explosive, but as you can see, every single athleticism trait he has when it comes to explosiveness, speed, and flexibility, he has above average in all those categories, and also hits at least one 54 or higher athleticism score. Because the thing about wide receiver, it's not necessarily about being elite athleticism overall when it comes to the wide receiver position. as much as having at least one aspect of your athleticism that is above average. And in Brandin Cooks' case, athleticism is not an issue when it comes to him. What has been somewhat of an issue is his production. His production isn't bad at the NFL level, and now we're kind of shifting to the NFL. But as you can see from 2014 to 2016, 2014 his production, he had a 59.44 passing yards market share production score, which is this is percentile grade, so this is compared to wide receivers in terms of production. He was injured that year, but even in the years where he was a little bit more healthy, 2015 he only had an 83.23 passing yards market share production score, and in 2016 he had an 84.09 passing yards market share production score. These aren't bad numbers by any stretch of the imagination, but it's not exactly 90 percentile or higher. Essentially a season like a Jerry Rice, or like he's never really had a dominant season in terms of market share in his NFL career so far. Some of this is because of the Saints offense, of course. I'm not denying that. You know, the Saints are offense that, again, doesn't it is very much our wide receiver by committee kind of system, where if you're a wide receiver, they're not necessarily going to rely on you in every single game. There's going to be games where you're going to go off and have like 100 yards, and you're going to have other games where you only have like 25 yards in terms of your production. So Saints offense might have muddled these numbers a bit, but the bottom line is he has been good. His production in the 80 percentile is good. That means that he's, in many ways, it means that he's rocking as a top 25 to top 40 wide receiver, if you will, if that makes any sense in terms of his percentile. So that's good. You know, if you're a top 25 wide receiver, a top 40 wide receiver, that's very good. It just isn't elite. And that's the only thing that kind of hurts him a bit, is just he hasn't exactly put up elite production, which of course brings us to Michael Thomas. When it comes to Michael Thomas, based on his production, he had a 66.54 passing yards market share production score. Based on that production, he doesn't really hit the 5-time All-Pro threshold, the 3-time All-Pro threshold, the 3-time Pro Bowl threshold, but he does hit the long-term starter threshold when it comes to his passing yards market share production since 1969 NFL draft class. Based on this data, Michael Thomas has a much better chance of becoming a long-term starter than he does a multiple Pro Bowl or multiple All-Pro player. It doesn't mean that he's bad. It just means that based on his production, his upside realistically is just a starting wide receiver. And also when you come to his athleticism, he's not as athletic as Brandin Cooks, but he does have some unique athleticism traits. He had a 63.35 explosive lower body strength score, which is better than Brandin Cooks. A 51.17 speed score, which unfortunately is less than Brandin Cooks. An 85.16 flexibility score, which is his best trait overall, is that he is very good in terms of flexibility. When you talk about just people who talk about his route running and his ability to come in and out of breaks smoothly and fluidly, that's what you're talking about. You're talking about guys that have really good hip flexibility, really good ankle flexibility, the ability to move fluidly out of your routes. And that's one thing that people give lots of praise to Michael Thomas over, is just his ability to, as a possession sort of wide receiver, to be able to get out of his breaks smoothly. And that was probably one of the main things that I remember from tape, from watching him. So he's essentially a very good, possession receiver, or at very least a very good tall wide receiver who has the ability to be very good in terms of route running, which a lot of guys who have really high flexibility typically are very good in terms of route running. And they don't really win with like brute force as much as winning with their ability to change directions in the open field. So that's good. Now, his production has been pretty much identical to Brandin Cooks from last year. Michael Thomas's production in 2016 as a rookie, he had an 80.58 percentile score, which is, again, good but not great, compared to Brandin Cooks, who had an 84.09. Cooks is definitely the better wide receiver when it comes to production from last year, but they're also very close. And some of this, again, has to do with the fact that the Saints offense is very much wide receiver by committee. Not one guy is going to shine. Everybody's going to get looks. So the bottom line is that Michael Thomas and Brandin Cooks, just from a production standpoint, are very similar in terms of the NFL production. Athleticism is a little bit different, but the bottom line is Michael Thomas, his profile at least, comes off more as a long-term starting wide receiver with very good flexibility, but not necessarily someone, I would say, who has a very high chance of becoming a multiple All-Pro, multiple Pro Bowl type of wide receiver. Essentially, I wouldn't expect him to become like a Michael Irvin type anytime soon. Which is probably the worst example, but like he doesn't exactly have elite athleticism traits overall. Like he's not like Julio Jones, is all I'm trying to say, and he doesn't necessarily have Julio Jones production either coming out of college. So he's someone that I would view as sort of a long-term starter who has potential to have some pretty high seasons, but not necessarily someone who is elite. Which again, in the Saints offense, you don't need to have a wide receiver to be elite. You just need someone who can get the job done, and I think that's the basic thing when it comes to Michael Thomas, that he can get the job done in terms of what you want from him. He's just not someone that you want to have a 90-plus percentile wide receiver season. Like, that just isn't very much in the cards for him based on what he did in college and also based on what he did in his first year, which was good, but just based on his college, it doesn't look like it's going to be much better than this. It might be a little bit better, but not like elite level. So ultimately, who wins this battle? Brandin Cooks versus Michael Thomas. First off, I would say Brandin Cooks pretty much has this battle from an analytics standpoint. When you look at Brandin Cooks coming out of college, he had a much higher overall production for coming out of college from Oregon State versus Michael Thomas, who only had less than that. He didn't hit the Pro Bowl threshold, which goes all the way back to the 1969 NFL draft class, which is not the best, It's not the best. I would say that who wins is all in the eyes of the beholder, because in many ways I think Brandin Cooks in that offense, in the Saints offense, was kind of as good as it gets. Because the Saints offense is one of those offenses where, again, it really caps wide receiver production. So you don't necessarily need to invest first rounders and wide receivers in that type of offense, because you just need a wide receiver who runs fast and has a specific skill set, and boom, you have production. So I would just say Brandin Cooks in that offense just doesn't make a lot of sense, because it's not really made to make a wide receiver an all-star as much as it's, sure, if a wide receiver gets 1,000 yards, that's amazing. But this is an offense that regularly has 5,000 plus yardage, with Drew Brees. So 1,000 yards in a 3,000 yard offense is amazing. 1,000 yards in a 5,000 yard offense is kind of, it's okay. So that's the thing I would say about Brandin Cooks, is he might actually look a lot better in the Patriots offense, potentially, based on whatever and however they use him. But I would just say, again, based on analytics, Michael Thomas pretty much gave you the same amount of production that Brandin Cooks did, although he hasn't exactly produced as much as Brandin Cooks yet. The other sort of factors that kind of help Cooks out a bit, which I didn't mention much, is just the fact that Brandin Cooks coming out was about 21 years old when he came out of the draft. Michael Thomas is 23. So in many ways, Brandin Cooks and Michael Thomas are pretty much virtually almost the same age, and put up pretty much similar production in terms of the years that they actually played in the NFL. So that other sort of aspect kind of limits the upside of Michael Thomas, is that this is a guy that is starting late, and although his production was better than Brandin Cooks as a rookie, Brandin Cooks as a rookie was 21 years old, while Michael Thomas as a rookie is 23 years old. So that just kind of adds to the sort of age kind of disparity. But overall, I really just think it's about what you want out of this trade. Because obviously Cooks wasn't liking it, with what was happening there. He's a wide receiver who, again, is a big part of the offense. He comes from Oregon State, where he was a wide receiver who was a hugely important guy, was the guy, essentially. And then he goes to this offense where it's very much wide receiver by committee, and then you have another guy who comes in, Michael Thomas, who is kind of stealing your thunder. You want to have a big breakout season, but this other guy's kind of stealing your throws. I'm not sure if that's exactly why this whole situation happened, but the very least I can understand that sort of aspect of it. But as far as like who is better long term, again, I would say Brandin Cooks has the better potential based on his analytics to be a much more successful player in the future versus Michael Thomas. And again, it's not to say that Michael Thomas is a bad football player or that Michael Thomas is not going to be good in the future. It's just that based on his production coming out of college, he does not hit the 3-time Pro Bowl threshold since the 1969 NFL draft class. And there have only been a couple of players who did not hit that threshold who went on to become multiple Pro Bowl guys. One example is Wes Welker. And then the last sort of guy is... that's really about it. Like, Wes Welker is like the main big outlier of a guy who just wasn't that productive, was about below average productive in college, and ended up being a multiple Pro Bowl guy. Michael Thomas is close to being a Pro Bowl guy. It's just that I would bank more on the side that also in the Saints offense, I would bank on Michael Thomas being more of a long-term starter than a multiple Pro Bowl or multiple All-Pro kind of guy. So, again, my name is James Cobern. You can find my work at draftcoburn.wordpress.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Geometrics. And if you like this content and you want more content like this, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Share this video as well with anybody that you know, and I will talk to you guys in the next video. Peace.